Welcome to Love Your Life After Divorce, the podcast where you'll learn everything you need to know to rebuild your life after divorce from the inside out. Let's dive in. Hey there. How are you guys doing? I hope you have had a good week, or that you had a good week last week, because today's Monday, if you're listening to this on a Monday. Anyway, I've had a really good week. Yesterday, I did something new that I've never done before. I played in my first pickleball tournament. How many of you guys love pickleball? Because I am a little bit obsessed and I wish I could play more often than I actually do. But anyway, yesterday was my first tournament and we came in second place. It was really, really fun. My partner and I had a really good time together and definitely want to do it again sometime soon. So, today I want to talk to you about feeling guilty after divorce and what to do about it. A lot of women feel guilty after divorce for many different reasons. I used to think that only women who wanted the divorce or had affairs felt guilty. But then I started talking with women who felt guilty that they didn't try hard enough or that they couldn't convince their husbands to stay. A lot of women feel guilty when they see their kids struggling because of the divorce. So, let me first say that I really do believe that guilt can be a helpful emotion. It signals to us that we've done something that's out of alignment with our values or who we know ourselves to be. Guilt can motivate us to apologize or repair a situation. We all make mistakes or bad choices sometimes. So, if you never experience any feeling of guilt, I personally think that shows that somehow you're lacking in strong values or empathy for other people. So, just feeling guilty in and of itself is not a problem. But what I want to address today is when we get stuck in our guilty feelings, when we wallow there, and when we can't seem to shake the guilt, even when we've accepted responsibility for our actions, even after we've apologized to the person we hurt and done what we can do to repair a situation or a relationship. Overcoming and releasing guilt is really important for healing and moving on. I personally really struggled with guilt after my divorce. And today I'm going to share a step by step process for releasing guilt. In my podcast episode last week, I shared two versions of my divorce story with you. And I mentioned how I had had an exit affair, which was an affair that happened at the very end of my marriage. I started a relationship with someone else shortly after I realized that I wanted a divorce. So the affair is the main reason that I struggled so badly with guilt. But wanting a divorce and getting one was also a reason that I felt really guilty. I was taught by my family and my religion that divorce was not an option. And so I really struggled for years while I was married to even admit to myself that I wanted a divorce. And I also felt really guilty for a few years after my divorce for choosing it. You're probably familiar with what guilt feels like, but there are some sneaky ways that it can show up. If you're struggling with feeling guilty because of your divorce, here are some things that might be happening. You might be profusely apologizing for something you did. You might be buying your kids gifts or refusing to set boundaries with them. You may be dwelling on how you wish you could change something that you did in the past. You may be beating yourself up or telling yourself that you are not a good person. When you are feeling extremely guilty, it can really actually affect your health. When you're stuck in guilt and shame, you may be eating less than normal, sleeping more or less than normal, exercising less. Even your physical mannerisms can change when you feel really guilty. How you walk, how you talk, your facial expressions. Guilt can actually lead to depression or anxiety. When you are feeling a lot of guilt, you're just in a really bad headspace, caught in a loop of negative self talk, and it can negatively affect your relationships. And also, it can really prevent you from moving forward with who you want to become and the life that you want to be living. You may be letting the guilt of choosing to end your marriage hold you back from success and happiness. It may stop you from embracing the positive shifts that came from the decision that you made. You may realize right now that guilt is eating you up, or it may always just be kind of in the very back of your mind, popping up at the most inconvenient times. You may think you've dealt with your guilt, but then all of a sudden, there it is again. So, this 5 step process I want to share with you today will allow you to get rid of the guilt and move on with your life. So, let's just jump right in. Step one in this process is to decide if you really want to let go of the guilt. I know this may sound strange, but sometimes we hold on to negative feelings like guilt because we think that it's serving a valuable purpose. So, here are 2 great questions to ask yourself to see whether or not you are unconsciously holding on to guilt. When you ask yourself these questions, just be really honest with yourself. Give yourself time and space to think about these questions. The first one is, why do I think I should be feeling guilty? And the second question is, what bad thing might happen if I stop feeling guilty? So, for me personally, when I was really struggling with guilt, I realized that I was using it to beat myself up. I felt like I should be feeling guilty and bad about myself because I had done something so wrong. And if I didn't feel guilty, then I would be letting myself off the hook and telling myself that the affair was just no big deal. I felt like I needed to somehow punish myself for what I had done. And heaping on guilt and shame was the way I was doing it. So when I realized that I was actually choosing to hold on to guilt, I was able to examine it and ask myself if feeling guilty was actually producing anything positive. And it wasn't. I had already apologized to my ex husband numerous times. In fact, at one point, he told me that I didn't need to apologize anymore, that he had forgiven me and moved on. I had also taken responsibility for my actions and admitted my mistake to everyone close to me. I had also learned from my mistake. I understood why I made the choice I did, and I decided that I would do something very differently next time. So, guilt was really serving no positive purpose in my life. In fact, it was causing some harm. It made me feel badly about myself, which made me a more negative person in general. I wasn't free and happy. I spent a lot of time beating myself up and wishing I could go back and change the past. This kept me from focusing on my future and using my energy to become a better version of myself and the life that I wanted. So once you've decided, really decided that you're ready to let go of guilt, the second step in this process is to find the thought that you are thinking that is creating the feeling of guilt. Remember, your thoughts create your feelings. So when you're feeling guilty, you're probably having several different thoughts that are producing that feeling of guilt. Here are some examples of some guilt producing thoughts about divorce. I messed everything up. I scarred my kids for life. I'm a horrible person. I hurt my ex so badly. I am so selfish. Now, you may not be able to quickly identify the thoughts that are creating your guilt just by thinking about it. So, here are some really helpful journaling prompts that can help you uncover the guilt producing thoughts that you're having. So, I just want you to write these down at the top of a piece of paper and then just write everything that comes to mind to finish these sentences. So, here are a few suggestions of journaling prompts. I shouldn't have. I'm so ashamed of. I wish I could change. I feel guilty because. So, when you finish these sentences, you're going to uncover all the thoughts you're having that are causing you to feel guilty. Now, it's really best if you can narrow it down to the one main thought you're having that produces the strongest amount of guilt. It's that one sentence on that paper that really stands out to you when you read back over it. So when you identify that one thought, it's time to ask yourself, do you really believe that? Do you really think it's true and accurate? Just to share from my own personal example, the main thought I was thinking was I should have tried harder. And when I stepped back and analyzed that thought, I realized that I really did think that I tried hard to make my marriage better and to stay married. I was the one who suggested marriage counseling 2 different times in our marriage. I'm the one who periodically would talk to my ex husband and ask him how we could improve our relationship. I told him what I needed from the relationship. And I stayed in the marriage for many years when I didn't feel connected and I wasn't happy with the relationship. So when I really thought about it, I knew I had tried really hard. So let's move on to step 3. Step 3 is to evaluate the results of feeling guilty. How do you act when you're feeling guilty? How do you treat other people in your life? Are you isolating yourself? Do you feel depressed, defeated, or hopeless? How much time do you spend dwelling on the past, going over past actions or events and wishing you could change them? Seeing how guilt is affecting you negatively can help you be motivated to release it. For myself, I was really spending a lot of time and energy replaying past events, imagining that I wish I could go back in time and redo those things. I was imagining different choices I would make if I was thinking more clearly or if I knew all of the pain and suffering that my actions would cause. I also realized that I wasn't showing up as the best mom I could be for my kids. When I felt really guilty and thought about the affair or thought about how the divorce might be affecting them, I was actually a little more distant from my kids. I wasn't as open or vulnerable or close to them as I would have been if I hadn't been racked with guilt. So, step 4 in this process is to choose a new thought to think instead. Instead of the thought that makes you feel guilty, you come up with a new thought. You can't just make yourself stop thinking the thought that's making you feel guilty. Your brain needs something new to think about and believe. I'm not sure if you know this or not, but you can actually choose what to think on purpose. You can intentionally choose your thoughts. This revelation, when I learned it several years ago, it literally changed my life. That is not an understatement. It is at the core of my coaching practice. So, in this case, you're going to choose a new thought to think instead of the one that's making you feel so guilty. So, there are a few criteria to keep in mind when you're choosing a new thought to think. First, it needs to be somewhat related to the old thought. So when your old thought pops up, you can redirect your brain to the new thought. It also needs to be believable. Now, you may not believe it 100% yet, but you do need to at least partly believe it's true. It also needs to create a feeling that you would rather be having instead of guilt. And it also needs to move you in the direction that you want to go. So let's use my thought as an example. I was thinking I should have tried harder. So the new thought that I chose to think was I tried hard for many years. Now, it would have been too much of a stretch for me to say I tried as hard as I possibly could have, because giving something 100% is really just totally subjective. You can't factually measure that. And for me to try to think that thought was just too far, too much of a stretch. And so that goes back to the idea that you have to make this thought believable to you. And I really did believe that I tried hard to make the marriage better for many years. And when I thought this new thought, I felt reassured or peaceful or accepting. So when you're trying to think of something new to think, you can just try on some thoughts, just like you would try on clothes. Sometimes a thought that's really helpful to one person isn't helpful at all to someone else. Don't pick a thought that you think you should be thinking. Just pick a thought that resonates with you and takes you in the direction you want to go. As long as the new thought is believable to you and gives you a feeling that's helpful, then that's all that really matters. And this part of the process is where a good coach can really come in handy. Just the other day, I was offering some new thoughts to one of my clients, and she said to me that she never would have come up with those thoughts on her own and that they were very helpful to her. She said that the language I was using wasn't even in her normal vocabulary and that she never talked to herself that way, but she really wanted to because it made her feel so much better and was a very compassionate way to speak to herself. So now we're on to the last step in this process, which is to practice thinking the new thought. This is an important step, and sometimes people overlook this when they're trying to change how they think. This is the step where you are actually rewiring your brain. If you overlook this step, you won't be able to let go of the guilt because you'll keep thinking the old thought by default. When you've been thinking a specific thought for a while, there is a well-worn neural pathway in your brain. I want you to imagine that it's like driving a car down an interstate. It's very smooth and flat, and you can go really fast. And that's what happens with those thoughts that we've been practicing for a while. They move very quickly through our brains. So when you're choosing to think a new thought, it's like forging a new path through a forest. It takes a lot of time and effort at first, but the more you practice it, the easier it becomes. So there are a few different ways I suggest you practice thinking the new thought. One is to catch yourself thinking the old thought and then remind yourself that you're actually now going to think this new thought instead. A good way to do this is noticing when you feel guilty, because when you're feeling guilty, that's when you're thinking that old thought. So pay attention to when you feel guilt cropping up and then notice what you're thinking and then redirect your brain to the new thought. You may not catch yourself thinking that guilt-producing thought right away or in the moment, and that's okay. If you realize it later instead of in the moment, just remind yourself that you can catch it next time. Or you can actually relive that moment in your mind and imagine yourself thinking the new thought instead. Another thing you can do is to actually anticipate when you might feel guilty next, and then imagine yourself being aware of what you're thinking and thinking the new thought instead. Maybe you know that you always feel guilty when you see your ex, or when you talk to a certain friend or family member about your divorce, or when one of your kids says something about the divorce. So you can imagine this future scenario and what you want to be thinking in that moment, which is the new thought that you've decided to think. So let's quickly review the 5 steps. You may want to go ahead and grab a pen and paper and just write these down. Number 1 is decide that you truly want to let go of the guilt. Number 2, find the thought that's causing you to feel guilty. Step number 3 is to evaluate how you're showing up because of the guilt. How is the guilt affecting you? Step 4 is to choose a new thought to think instead. And step 5 is to practice thinking the new thought. I want you to imagine what it would be like for you if you no longer felt guilty for getting a divorce or for something that you did that you regret. How would your life be different right now if you no longer wrestled with guilt? Imagine how light and free you would feel. If guilt was no longer taking center stage in your mind, you would free up space to dream about your future and to create a life you love. So get to work on these 5 steps. There is no need to wait. You've suffered for long enough. If you need any help or support along the way, please reach out to me. That is what I'm here for. You can easily email me at Angie@angiewilsoncoaching.com. And I would love to answer any questions you have about this process or help you identify your guilt-producing thought or the new thought you want to think. So I'm going to put in the show description the link where you can schedule a free call with me. If you want to jump on and talk through this process with me, I would love to help you in any way I can. So I'll talk to you soon. Did you know that there are 5 distinct stages to healing after divorce? Which stage are you currently in? And how can you successfully move to the next stage? Find out by getting the free roadmap so you can heal and move on faster after divorce. Simply go to my website, angiewilsoncoaching.com, and click Get the Free Roadmap.